Hey, it's Lindsay, and I wanted to remind you that CityCast is doing our annual listener survey. It just takes a few minutes, and you could win a $250 Visa gift card or CityCast swag. Head over to citycast.fm/survey. That's citycast.fm/survey. Today on CityCast Boise. With Congress slashing funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Boise State Public Radio is staring down a new reality. This cornerstone of local news is now facing tough choices about programming and staffing. Is this just the latest blow to Boise's shrinking media landscape, or a chance to reshape public media? It's Wednesday, August 20th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. On the show today is Tom Michael, General Manager at Boise State Public Radio. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, great to be with you on CityCast.
So, how much of your budget at Boise State Public Radio has disappeared since Congress cut the Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding in July?
Yeah, what a dire news it was to experience this. Our percentage of funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, our last audited financial year, was 20%. Our budget's about $4.5 million. We were looking at a community service grant of and programming grants of upwards of $600,000.
Wow. And have you been able to take any steps to try and fill the gap, emergently after losing that significant portion of your budget?
We did, and I want to commend the generosity of the community. In the days since, Friday, July 18th, when the funding was cut, we went immediately into an emergency drive and, pretty quickly raised some $300,000. And now, in about mid-August, we're at about $420,000. Still, less than the $600,000 I mentioned. And we know we can't push that emergency button every time. These annual grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which we call CPB, occurred year after year.
So it sounds like the emergency donations have come close to reaching where you would hope to be with those grants. Are there any plans in place or plans in the works to try to cover that amount year after year?
Well, certainly, we're reaching out to major donors. We're looking for multi-year gifts. But I have to say, even beyond that $600,000, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting kind of bundled things that were cost savings. So the loss of this federal funding is closer to $1 million, according to our estimates. And what that means is, as part of this system, we had music rights covered. So we can use incidental music on NPR and PBS and local stations. We had interconnection covered. So that is the satellite interconnection. And so there's other equipment, content, and services. And that picture isn't yet clear. Again, we estimated that impact to be more like close to $1 million, the federal funds plus these bundled services. So there's a lot of unknowns still out there. But our community has been amazingly supportive in these, opening weeks of finding out that, this public-private partnership that's, been in place for decades, Congress pulled the rug out from under us. And
let's say, just worst case scenario, Congress doesn't restore funding, that these cuts remain in place, year after year. How long can the station operate at current levels with these emergency donations and gifts without funding being restored? Or at what point would you have to start looking at potential cuts?
Oh, there'll have to be some sort of rejiggering for any station. You can't take $500 million out of the public broadcasting system and not expect there's going to be cuts, collaborations, consolidations. So we're trying to first press that fundraising button and say, help us achieve these goals. We're also leaning into collaborations. Could there be some shared services models down the road? In 2018, we stood up a regional journalism collaboration called the Mountain West News Bureau. And just last week, we announced some new partners with NPR, Colorado Public Radio, station in Phoenix, some bigger partners. So this expands that collaboration. Simultaneously, we are looking at more shared services with some other stations throughout Idaho. We share one of our programs with KSU in Pocatello.
If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like there are network opportunities with collaborations, other stations, other ways that you can work together with groups that may also be impacted by this to maintain as many services as possible to find ways around these funding cuts.
Yeah, I think there's right. I think there's an opportunity for that. But let's not gloss over the fact that this has been our business model for years, this public-private partnership. And it allowed us to do things that, we wouldn't do if we weren't such a mission-oriented, non-commercial educational station. We have 30 transmission signals throughout Idaho, mostly in rural Idaho. We have big investments in small towns throughout Idaho. And that's because of this public-private partnership. So to suddenly, in a very close vote, kind of lose this business model and have to, spin around and figure things out is pretty distressing for the system. And we really appreciate the donors who have stood up. We're also looking at, foundations for some support as well, if they believe in this system. So public media, since the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 has talked about universal service, and it reaches some 99% of the country. My fear, Lindsay, is that not just here in Idaho, but elsewhere across the country, that we're going to have growing news deserts. And that's a real fear on some of those kind of more beleaguered small town public radio stations that do great community service, but just can't quickly fill that funding loss.
Well, and I want to jump into that because Idaho is a very rural state. We talk a lot about Boise and the Treasure Valley on this show, but what is at stake for these rural communities that rely on your coverage if stations like Boise State Public Radio go dark, or you have to make choices about certain programming being cut?
Right. And so we're going through everything on the expense side with a fine-tooth comb. We actually did make some small programming changes. We're looking at that closely. But as far as our rural service, we had just gone through this big upgrade, right? We had just gone through this infrastructure upgrade, purchased some new equipment. We had an opportunity to, improve equipment in Salmon and in Chalice and in Stanley. And we purchase equipment that should last us 10, 15 years. So it's not something you can just unwind or sell. It's a non-commercial asset. And so we've made investments in communities like Chalice, population 920, like Cambridge, population 250, that maybe commercial operators wouldn't because there isn't that, return on investment. But for us, it was mission and universal service. So now we're in a funny spot, right? So we have this mission to serve the entirety of the state, but we don't have that public-private partnership that made it more doable.
Are there any less essential services or programming that you've offered that the community has enjoyed, that we're benefiting from, but ultimately may not make the cut if you're having to really make these hard choices?
So here's the irony or the coincidence of it all. So we're here on CityCast, and it's not just you and I talking. There are other people behind the scenes because local news is expensive. One of the hallmarks, at least of my time at Boise State Public Radio, has been an expansion of the news department, and I don't want to see anything, retreat there. But we're definitely looking at how we can do things more efficiently. We had some, there are some positions that might not get refilled, not in news, but elsewhere in the organization that recently happened. So we're trying to work with our partner at Boise State University and, be smart about how we approach the future. But we have to be smart about it, right? So we're in the public trust, and the public trusts us with their money, and they want us to make these smart decisions. But I got to say, the challenge is that local news is expensive. We're committed to it, but it's expensive.
Well, and I don't think people always understand how interconnected local news is and these local news stations can be, because at CityCast, we lean heavily on Boise State Public Radio and build conversations around your journalism. We talk with hosts like George Prentice and journalists like Jimmy Dawson. How would losing your coverage or your ability to create as much coverage as you have been affect not only us, but the whole community and this local news ecosystem that we have.
Right. In public media, we try to center the audience. What unmet needs aren't we reaching? How are we best serving the audience? So I feel it's a loss. Again, my fear is news deserts in places, and not just us. So, we're, like I said, in some big cities, federal funding represented 10% or even 5% of the annual budget. I told you for us it was 20%. Mm-hmm. Well, in Pocatello, it's 25%. And on the Nez Perce Reservation and one of our 50 tribal stations across the country in Lapwai, it's 40%. So we're not just thinking about our own self-preservation, but how we can keep this, system strong. I sit on some national boards in public media, and so I'm trying to think about, ways in which we can support each other kind of beyond that. So you're right about this, local news ecosystem, as you just described. But it even expands beyond that throughout the state and other quarters.
Need a reset or just a chance to slow down? Trade the traffic and to-do lists for a glass of wine and an open sky at Walla Walla. Just a scenic 4-hour drive from Boise, this peaceful destination in the heart of the Pacific Northwest offers a true escape from your hectic schedule. You'll have the opportunity to wander through more than 130 wineries nestled among golden hills and vineyards, and then cozy up in a tasting room. You can stroll through the charming historic downtown by day, and at night, dine al fresco on meals made by celebrated chefs from fresh ingredients grown just down the road on local farms. Come discover why Walla Walla is one of the Pacific Northwest's best-kept secrets. You don't have to go far to feel far away. Plan your getaway at wallawalla.org today. Now, Tom, public radio is often labeled liberal, especially in red states like Idaho. And critics argue that public tax dollars shouldn't fund media that they think is biased. I don't know if you know this about me. I used to be very libertarian. And so when I'm thinking with my, libertarian Lindsay brain, I think about that. From that position, I would have asked, well, why should Idahoans pay for public radio? Why should they pay for Boise State Public Radio if it has what in my libertarian mind would have been a liberal bias?
Well, I want to separate those two issues and answer you, Lindsay. First is accusations of bias. So federal funding doesn't support biased and partisan news coverage, and there aren't any opinion shows on public broadcasting on NPR local stations, et cetera. You could turn on some other media and hear one voice for, 2 to 4 hours, sharing their opinion. Now, done well, local public radio stations bring in a variety of opinions. And so they bring in that balance. They try to ensure that their journalists have that balance. So that's definitely something that you continually strive for. Now, on the accusation of, why should federal funds go to this media and not other media, I would point back to that public-private partnership for only, $1.40 per taxpayer. We can leverage that $1 and get $7 in private funding and do things that commercial operators couldn't do, like serve very rural areas. We're also offered freely over the air. So there's no internet paywall. We're also real time. So last week, I was in the Winco dairy aisle and I ran into Stephen Hatcher from the Idaho Commission on the Arts. And he said, oh my gosh, he's looking at his phone. I think there's a fire near my house. And sure enough, it was a blaze that popped up near Roby Creek. I texted our host, and then I went back to my car and I heard during the break, Troy Oppie, our afternoon host, talk about a level 3 evacuation go now order for Roby Creek area. So, we also serve that real-time function too, and we have, real reporters. So to the fact that, should it be federally funded? I think we should absolutely have that discussion. We're part of the public trust. I think we should have that discussion. And so my answer on that would be because it allows us to do things that are more community service.
And Tom, do you think that this might be a time where there needs to be evolution within the public broadcasting sphere because commercial outlets survive on ad revenue and subscriptions. Should that be, or could that be, an avenue that public radio leans on in addition to donations and gifts to make ends meet?
We're in a funny spot right now because according to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, we are considered an NCE. That's non-commercial educational. That means we cannot take money for political advertising and we can't do traditional advertising. So unless that were to change, then I would agree with you. But as far as is the funding model change? Yeah, federal funding's gone, right? It is, as of today, it is gone in a close vote by Congress. And it has to change. The business model has to change. So the challenge to us would be, how do we keep up that traditional mission of universal service, right? Statewide service, even without that federal funding. How sad would it be if we were just Treasure Valley Public Radio, right? I mean, it's really important to hear voices from across the state.
Well, and like you mentioned, it seems like areas like Boise, where there's a larger population base, where we might be able to fundraise for public radio and Boise State Public Radio, we might be able to keep service at or close to the same level we've come to expect. But like you said, Pocatello might be in a very different situation, the Nez Perce Reservation in a very different situation. And so it seems like communities who need this access most would be the first to start losing it.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that's accurately said. And that's the sad irony here. If you've ever done a river trip, let's say coming off the Selway and you're driving back toward Boise, and you might hear the voice of Daniel Spalding on KIYE out of Lapway, and he's doing Nimiipuu language lessons. I mean, just great cultural contributions to our state on that airwaves. And I've been in touch with him. He's part of our bureau, Our Living Lands, of covering Indigenous issues, and he's concerned. So I think you're absolutely right to worry first about some of our far-flung areas and the service they get.
Now, with rumors of a recession and so many cuts being made to so many important groups and services, Tom, do you worry about donor fatigue or how that could impact fundraising?
I feel that journalism is a close second or a close third to a lot of these issues because it amplifies all of those issues. Just on your program, the range of topics that you cover bring the issue to other people. So I do feel like journalism, public service journalism, runs a close second, third, fourth to all these very big issues. And you're right, there are a lot of issues, a lot of, let's say, federal cuts that have happened in the last 6 months that are garnering donors' attention. And will people forget in a year's time, that we just got 20% of our funding cut? Sure. They actually expect us to restructure and figure things out. And, our talented team is leaning into those. I'll admit it's a time of anxiety. It's a time of transition, but maybe we could do things better. Maybe we can figure out the satellite system a little bit better. Maybe we can, share better. So there are opportunities as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you that I think journalism and this public access journalism, access to information, is essential for a constitutional democratic republic. So I hope that is something that people will remember and maintain, even as it feels like things are getting pretty turbulent for lots of industries and lots of different areas in our society right now. So Tom, what are the best ways that the community can get involved or help support Boise State Public Radio right now?
Well, we appreciate that. Again, we can receive charitable donations. I'll say this kind of criticism, maybe. Criticism, it's a double-edged sword. We've been good over the last decades, year after year, of getting membership. And we've said, hey, we appreciate it. Your $100 helps sustain the work that we do. We have close to 10,000 members throughout Idaho, which is really strong. But membership only gets us so far. We've got to learn to attract the attention of foundations and of major donors. And that's something we need to get better at. And we need to be stronger at. Because, we've been around almost 50 years. And, as you just said, we serve those vital functions that, some might even say help to safeguard democracy, right? And we certainly amplify all the great work done in our state, voices that don't always get platformed, all these things. There's a lot of new funding organizations out there nationally, and they tend to look at the digital startups. They tend to look in the former newspaper space. And I think public media, even though it's quote unquote legacy media, can be just as innovative and can be just as relevant today. And in fact, it's funny how here we are in a podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Something like the sound of a voice is almost more relevant than it was 15 years ago. We are listening to podcasts, we're listening to other humans talk to other humans. And this is important. This is something that we're good at. This is something that, your team as podcasters are good at. So I think we're positioned well for this news future. And I hope those foundations, some of that new tech money foundation can see that as well.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to break this down and be so candid about what this has meant for Boise State Public Radio.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your work. What I didn't say was our website, which is just simply boisestatepublicradio.org. And thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a look at what it's like to run a swinger business in Boise. You won't want to miss it.